The Offer. In this episode, an entrepreneur mechanic travels to New York City to rescue a famous clockmaker from prison. On their long journey home, the clockmaker shares a series of stories and a secret. It's a secret that holds the power to outsmart all competitors and build a business empire, but only if the entrepreneur can find and follow the clues left behind by a past generation. Our story begins in olden times. In the almanac of the New World, the year is 1830. It's a dark night, but there's a bright moon, illuminating a clear sky over a patchwork of wooden houses and single-family farms that make up a small village called Brooklyn. Only a handful of years ago, this place was just a tiny colony owned by an English king. But in this new moment in time, its inhabitants are free and independent citizens of the great state of New York. Now, a horse-drawn carriage races down a dirt road. The driver whips the horse onward as a passenger jostles back and forth and tries to balance in the seat without falling off. The carriage passes open grassy fields, speckled with small country homesteads, then tucks inside the busy streets of Brooklyn's downtown district, with its grid of two-story and tightly packed wooden townhouses and warehouses and workshops. The horse is finally reined in to a shaky stop alongside the only building on the block made of sturdy brick and stone, and for good reason. Its signpost reads, Brooklyn Jailhouse. Out of the carriage leaps our main character, a tall Yankee man dressed in a suit. He flips the driver a coin, then offers another tip. Some advice. Your carriage spring is bent too much, right here under the seat frame. If you fix it straight, you'll get a smoother ride and save your horse all the extra tug work. He'll last longer, too. Thank you, sir. You some kind of mechanic? I learned the trade. I used to be a wagon maker, in fact. Made carriages just like this one. Tough business. So now I'm fixing to make something else. Something more valuable. Something everybody not only wants, but needs. The kind of thing that the King of England would trade away all the treasures of his realm just to get one more piece of it. Oh yeah? What'd that be? Time, my friend. Time. Our well-dressed former wagon maker walks up the steps and into the Brooklyn jailhouse. Inside the lobby, there's a policeman seated at a desk behind a cage. State your name, residency, and purpose, he says. I'm John Burge from Bristol, Connecticut. Here to post bail for one of your prisoners. The policeman flips open his ledger and arranges the customary exchange of payment and permissions. Now Mr. John Burge is escorted into the inner chambers of the jail. It's a foul and foul-smelling place, filled with con men in expensive suits squatting next to murderers in blood-stained clothes, alongside an assortment of thieves, drunks, and degenerates. At the end of the hall is a small, solitary cell where an old man is asleep on a bench. He's wearing a leather apron and shop clothes, as if he was just plucked off the factory working floor, which, in his case, was exactly how he was arrested. The policeman unlocks the cell and wraps his baton on the old man's thigh. Ouch! I'm awake! Is it breakfast time yet? Here you go, Mr. Burge. This is your Joseph Ives, accused of the crime of egregious unpaid debts. His trial is next week, but until then, he's all yours. And so begins the rescue of clockmaker Joseph Ives. Except the next thing that happened was the last thing that John Burge expected. You see, Burge had come all this way, at great expense, to bail out Ives because he wanted to be a clockmaker. At this moment in time, the village of Bristol had sparked a wildly successful industry of making a very unique and popular machine, a clock. But it was a cutthroat kind of business, with legions of competitors, fraudsters, and fakes. But this was also an unprecedented moment where great fortunes could be made very quick. So quick, in fact, that you could make a fortune, lose it all, and then make another one, all within the span of a single lifetime. While the rest of the known world struggled under the feudal yoke of kings, tyrants, and tribes, the workers of a village called Bristol woke each day knowing that every drop of their honest sweat could yield a hefty profit.
and the rights to that profit was theirs alone, after they pay back their investors and creditors, of course. And one of Bristol's most prominent investors, Dr. Titus Merriman, had convinced Burge that rescuing Ives and then partnering with him was the only way to get an edge in this cutthroat business of clockmaking, because Ives was the most ingenious clockmaker of them all. Ives had been apprenticed in clockmaking at a young age with his relatives and had more experience in tinkering and timekeeping than everyone else in town. He just wasn't a very good businessman, and worse, he was too cantankerous, too rough around the edges, a bit of a rogue. Burge was the opposite. He grew up as the son of a farmer who worked his way into the carpentry trade. He served as a soldier in the Second War of Independence, keeping watch over the harbor of Old Saybrook in 1812 for British ships that never came. He raised steeples and framed houses, advancing his woodworking skills to new levels. After a successful stint at constructing wagons, he now dreamt of new pursuits. His first venture into clockmaking was only as an investor. He used his profits from his wagon business to partner with another wealthy businessman in town, Dr. Titus Merriman, and the both of them funded a clockmaking startup. But the mechanics and carpenters they hired, they didn't produce a very good product because they weren't really trained in clockmaking, so the startup failed. You see, it was easy to acquire the design templates to make a clock movement, but it was much harder to get the right raw materials, labor, and quality control, all things that were necessary to produce a finished, functioning clock. Nevertheless, Burge was undeterred. For his next venture, he wanted to be more than just an investor. He wanted to be there, in the workshop, alongside someone who was apprenticed in the clockmaking tradecraft, and bring to market a truly special and profitable clock. This was a new nation, the United States of America, and transformational opportunities were everywhere. The son of a farmer could choose to become a clockmaker. You didn't need the permission of a king or a guild to do so. Burge had caught clock fever, but it was a tough business, and he needed an edge over his competition. The rare talents of Ives was his edge, and so Burge was ready to risk his future on an offer of partnership. So there he is in the jail, and he says, "Joe, come back with me to Bristol. Let's build a clock company together. Let's capture the fortune that only hard work can bestow. I made all the arrangements. If we leave now, you'll be home by dinner time tomorrow." This was Burge's offer as he stood on one side of the jail bars. The response from the other side was, well, quite surprising. "Mr. Burge, I don't know who sent you, but I'm never going back to Bristol. I'd rather rot here in this jail for the rest of my life than have my talents robbed of me again. Every time I get a leg up in the clock business, one of you investors comes along to tear me down. Scoundrels and fraudsters, all of them. I came to Brooklyn so I could work for myself, not so I could work with you, Mr. Burge, or whoever sent you." So here Mr. Burge gets a taste of local politics. You see, Ives had been working in Bristol his whole life. In a small community, folks get to know each other very well. Grudges are held for a very long time. And Ives still burns from one of his first clock business failures. You see, he had two investors, one being Lot Newell, grandson of a famous preacher, the Reverend Samuel Newell, from Bristol's First Congregational Church. Ives was a church-going man, and so he believed that promises made by the grandson of a preacher bore the same credibility as the preacher himself, except that Newell soon earned a bad reputation from issuing fraudulent paper credits, fake notes, that forced Ives's business to go bankrupt. And in those days, credit was the lifeblood of a business. Securing a startup loan from a key investor, such as a local shopkeeper or a wealthy doctor, was the only viable way to organize a clockmaking business. Without the trust of a financial sponsor, it would have been impossible to assemble the factory space, water power, machines, workers, and materials necessary to get enough finished clocks built and out the door before your competitors crushed you by lowering their prices to outsell your clock models or raising their wages to steal your most talented workers. Trust was everything, and it was clear in that moment in the Brooklyn jailhouse that Ives did not trust Burge. So Burge had to turn to a different playbook to recruit Ives. "Joe, listen, I didn't come here just as myself, but upon the wise counsel of lots of regular folks in Bristol who want to see you back home. If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the good Lord gave you the gift of being a talented clockmaker. If you want to spend that talent making clocks in New York, then far be it from me to get in your way. But we both know that in New York City, they only make one thing, money. So if you want to make money, you should stay here. But if you want to make clocks, we know there's only one place in the world where the best clocks are made. Bristol. You should see it now, back there. There's a new clock factory opening almost every week, but most of them poor quality. Bad products. The reputation of our town deserves better. It deserves people like you. I recognize that you wanted to strike out on your own in this big city, and that's a noble thing, and I acknowledge it. But it's a much nobler thing to do business alongside your kin, and in a place where, with your gifts, you can make something new, something unique, that matters. And there's only one place where we can put all your talents to work. Home. At this point, Ives knows Mr. Burge is right. He should go home. But Ives isn't convinced that Burge was the man he should partner with. That's right, Mr. Burge. I should go home. But I don't need you for that. There's lots of investors back in Bristol. Why you? Burge doesn't have the right answer, but he has the belief that he's the right man.
He responds straight from the heart.
Mr. Ives, I don't know much about clocks, but I know about time. God only gives us so much time on this earth to seize what we believe to be our destiny. My father was born a farmer, and I was born the same. My destiny could have been to be a farmer, but then I looked up around, and I saw all these other destinies in front of me, all these other different pathways of life. I was given the destiny of a farmer, and even a soldier for a short time. Then I chose to be a carpenter, steeple raiser, wagon maker. Now I'm choosing to be a clockmaker. A new choice, new destiny. It's a transformational opportunity. I never got a real sense of purpose working a shovel on the farm or carrying a rifle. My wagon business didn't work out, but I'm hoping the clock business will, if you agree to help me with that. In the end, I suppose I'm like all these other souls looking for a new purpose. I want to make clocks, not because I have to, not because I was born into it, but because I can. I choose it. Ives doesn't immediately respond. He stays just in the moment of that silence, and you can see he's motivated a bit by Burge's speech. And then, sensing a moment of acceptance, Burge delivers the final offer. Well, Mr. Ives, some of your family advised me on a few things when they found out I was coming down here. They said I should appeal to your head and your heart. And if all that failed, I should appeal to your stomach. And so Burge takes out his pocket, a small cloth, and unwraps it to reveal a treat. Joe, I brought you a big slice of that famous gingerbread from the kitchen at the Lewis Tavern. Figured you'd be hungry, since there was either no food or bad food in this place. And Ives, he smiles. The next thing you know, the two of them are walking free down the steps of the Brooklyn jailhouse and out into the moonlight. Wait, I forgot my tools. Ives runs back inside the jailhouse and retrieves the tools that they confiscated from him during his arrest. There's a handsaw, a jackknife, a square ruler, and wire clippers. Everything you need to make a basic wooden clock movement by hand. Thank you, Mr. Burge. I owe you for paying my creditors. Joe, I didn't pay your creditors. I just paid your bail. Now let's hightail it back to Bristol before those creditors come looking for you. The next stop is down at Brooklyn's departure port, overlooking the East River. It's the middle of the night, but there's still ships crossing from one side to the other. Burge finds a sloop to ferry them across to the other side, to the island of Manhattan, in the heart of New York City. From there, you can take a sailboat to the port of New Haven, and finally, a stagecoach up the Waterbury Turnpike and back to Bristol. But before the next stage of their journey, Burge has an additional objective. In the clock business, you need two things: talent and credit. Ives is the talent, but Burge still needs sufficient credit to back their startup clock factory. Lucky for him, New York City is the center of banking and lending. So Burge leads Ives down to Wall Street and finds a very particular establishment, Chemical Bank, a conservative institution founded by tradesmen in the medical field. So here we have, sitting behind the desk of the Chemical Bank office in Wall Street, a very conservative and scowling, unfriendly banker. His first customers of the day are two strangers, one in a suit and one wearing a leather workman's apron. They just come through the door, and they're asking now for a letter of credit for a very large sum to fund a very specialty business, clockmaking. And being a New York banker, in the infamous era of Wildcat and Red Dog banking, our conservative underwriter here is very suspicious of loaning money to strangers. First thing, he asks for a reference. Burge planned for this. He produces a letter of confidence from Dr. Titus Merriman of Bristol, Connecticut, who is also a certified member of the Connecticut Medical Society. Our scowling banker confirms Merriman's credentials by checking one of his in-house record books of doctors and societies who are already certified to be creditworthy by Chemical Bank. Merriman's name, he finds it. It's there. Score. The banker's second request is a bit more difficult. Before he gives Burge any credit, he needs a certification of the skill sets of clockmaking. These two gentlemen say they want to be clockmakers. Did they bring a sample clock that he could inspect? Well, here Burge is stumped. He doesn't have a product because he doesn't have a business yet. But in order to start a business, he needs to show a product. It's this classic game of cat and mouse. But lucky for him, Ives is there. And Ives is quite resourceful. Ives sees two clocks hanging on the wall alongside some other ornate furnishings in the Chemical Bank office. I see you've got two clocks there. Do they keep good time? Not good enough. Brass one's a bit slow and the wood one is broke. Well, sir, clock fixing is my trade. Do you mind if I take a look? Go right ahead. Ives inspects the two clocks for a moment, then opens up their faces and starts fiddling around a bit with the inner parts of the clocks. You see, the brass one here is just poor quality. The metal wheels were cast in the wrong way, probably by somebody who didn't know what they were doing, and so they don't turn right. They get stuck. And because they're made out of metal, there's not much we can do to fix it. But this clock here with the wooden wheels, we can do something about that. Do you mind if I borrow your spectacles? Ives takes out his wire clippers and clips off the end of one of the metal frames of the banker's glasses, much to the banker's displeasure. Then he opens up the wooden clock movement and uses his jackknife to cut off a little tooth of one of the inner gear wheels. He saws away a bit with his fine saw, and then uses the blunt end of his knife to hammer the metal sliver of the banker's spectacles into the wooden wheel as a replacement for the missing tooth. Putting all the pieces back together again, Ives returns the clock to its position on the wall and swings the pendulum back into motion. There you go, sir. All fixed. Wind it once every 30 hours and it'll keep you perfect time. Our scowling banker is impressed. He writes a letter of credit from Chemical Bank for a handsome sum and instructs Burge to make good on it within a year, just enough time to get a successful clockmaking venture off the ground. And so, as the sun rises to its midday zenith, Burge finds himself aboard a sailboat in New York Harbor, winds blowing towards home, with the talent and the capital in his hands to start a new chapter of his life, and in the annals of Bristol's clockmaking business. From the bow of the ship, the skyline of New York City is a glorious sight. It's a dense urban sprawl of ornate and ugly buildings, and hovering above them all, not skyscrapers, not yet, but church steeples. People are moving everywhere, in the buildings, streets, and riverbanks. Half of these people were born as subjects of an English king, while others were born free as citizens of the United States, and even more, newly arrived as immigrants from far away, but all of them now New Yorkers. The river, too, is full of activity. Tall ships and ferries plow towards their destinations, while smaller boats dance around them. As Burge takes it all in, he's filled with pride at what he's already accomplished and a powerful sense of eagerness to get started on this new adventure back home. But for Ives, it's a bittersweet journey. Seeing the city and its people, he feels the deep sting of disappointment. He wanted to join them. He wanted a fresh start, to be successful, to prove that he could do it on his own. But instead, he's going back home empty-handed. Back to old frustrations, back to old challenges, back to old grudges. The journey back to Bristol takes 2 full days. During this time alone with Ives, Burge hopes he can discuss the details of their new clockmaking venture before they reach all the distractions of home. But Ives is a bit too wily. He's not ready to talk. The sailing voyage between New York and New Haven is a full day on the water, and so Ives spends the whole time sleeping. Burge doesn't disturb him because he figures he's had a rough go in jail and needs the rest. That night, Burge reserves overnight accommodations at a hotel near the wharf in New Haven. And Ives just disappears right into his room without even the courtesy of saying good night. The next morning, Burge arranges breakfast in the parlor of the hotel. Ives comes down late. Burge tries to get a discussion going, but Ives's mouth is already full of food. Instead of talking business, he spends the whole breakfast focused on bread, butter, and kettles of black tea. And there's no more time to chat. They're running late. Burge has to grab Ives by the collar and rush him off to the stagecoach depot to catch their ride home before it departs. Burge reserved 2 seats on the New Haven to Litchfield stagecoach service, with a transfer at the Plymouth stop to change over to the Hartford service, which runs through Bristol. In the hilly countryside of Connecticut, stagecoach lines are the fastest mode of transportation between urban centers and rural towns, because it's near impossible to find enough flat and even terrain that you need to lay train tracks. The stagecoach is also the perfect place to get Ives talking, as they'll be sitting elbow to elbow inside the cab all day. And Burge thinks that Ives is finally rested and fed. But again, Burge is frustrated in his attempt to discuss business affairs. They share the close quarters of the stagecoach cab with 2 other passengers, businessmen, sitting right across from them. Ives immediately leans in to Burge and he whispers, "I recognize them. They're Waterbury gents, competitors. We best not talk business, or they'll pocket our bright ideas for themselves." So for the 3rd time, Ives stonewalls any discussion of the particulars of their business arrangement. At this point, Burge, he's getting a little suspicious of Ives's intentions. Is he really dedicated to their partnership? Or is he laying the groundwork to back out once they get back to Bristol? After half a day traversing the rocky and pot-marked turnpike towards Litchfield, the stagecoach driver pushes his horse team over the final hilltop before the Waterbury stop. "Rein in the horses!" Ives yells at the driver. "We're getting out here." "But, Joe, our next transfer is over there in Waterbury." "Never mind that, Burge. I know a shortcut over the mountain. Faster than waiting around for that Hartford coach. You know it's always running late." And before Burge can protest, Ives yanks him out of the cab, and the 2 stranded travelers watch the stagecoach disappear down the hill in a trail of dust. Burge is annoyed. He was hoping for a quick transfer from Plymouth to Bristol. Now Ives is leading him for a big climb over the mountain and through the woods. "Joe, from here it's quite a walk. At this distance, we'll have to make it by sundown, or tarry at one of the taverns in Woolcott." "Nah, Burge, we'll make it to the green by sunset. You look like a young pup, not afraid of a good hike, and I spent too much time cooped up in that jail cell. Need to stretch my legs." And off they go, up and down the old Mattituck Forest Trail that cuts through the mountains, hills, and ridgelines that rise between Waterbury and Bristol. Before long, they reach the crest of the mountain and pause at an overlook with a clear view of the surrounding area. Out in the distance is the town of Plymouth, recognizable by the long lines of smoke rising from the smokestacks of a dozen factories belonging to the Plymouth clockmakers, all competitors to the Bristol outfits. You can even see the stagecoach of the Hartford line racing eastwards towards Bristol, easy to spot from a distance because the cab is painted bright yellow. Burge is sarcastic. "Joe, look over there. The Hartford stagecoach. Looks like it'll beat us to Bristol, huh?" Ives doesn't appreciate Burge's sarcasm, so he just marches on silently. At this point, Burge is a little pissed with the whole silent treatment. He summons the name of Plymouth's most successful clockmaker, the famous Eli Terry, with the hope of taunting Ives to finally talk business. "Joe, look at all those big clock factories over there in Plymouth. You think the clever Joseph Ives can build a business bigger than Eli Terry? Maybe he can invent us some new design, get us an edge. How about this idea, Joe? Instead of using weights to power clock motion, let's adapt a wagon spring to do the power. Same type of spring that I used in my wagons, but on a smaller scale. We get a patent for it just like Eli did with his designs. What do you think, Mr. Ives?" "Oh, you want a patent, do you? That's dirty business. Everyone thinks Eli Terry got his patents so he could protect his clock designs from his old partner, Seth Thomas, who was running his own clock business, building clocks with Eli's design but not paying Eli a nickel for it. So Eli hires a bunch of lawyers and sues Seth Thomas, and all the newspapers are writing up a storm about this big legal battle. But that's not what really happened. In my opinion, the 2 were in cahoots. They concocted the whole affair so they could box everybody else out of the business. Once everybody read in the papers how costly it was to fight over patents, They'd rather just pay Eli and Seth a small fee to license their designs and keep their hands clean. The whole country wants to buy a quality clock, and there's more than enough business to go round. So it made more sense to buy a license from Eli than to steal his design and then get caught up in a courtroom tussle. What is it you really want into this business for, Mr. Burge? Making patents or making clocks? Well, clocks, of course. But if you can't earn a fair profit, there's not much use moving heaven and earth to start up a new clock production if your competitor is going to make it the same or cheaper and run you back on the street. Patents or no patents, Eli was an inventor who could protect his clock designs. We'd be smart to do the same, Joe. Inventor? Well, Eli wasn't an inventor. He was a replicator. He took a clock design that everybody was already using, slapped a patent on it, and then configured a factory to build them out faster than everyone else. Every clockmaker in these parts knows the tired old story of bigwig Eli Terry and the Porter contract, which made him the wealthiest clockmaker in the business. But that's not the half of it. It wasn't the patents that Eli used to protect his clock designs. There was something else going on. You see, there's the Porter contract story that everybody knows about, and there's the inside story people don't know about. Burge senses a change in the mood. Telling stories, Ives is warming up a bit. It seems he's finally ready to talk, and maybe talk business. Burge prods him more. Well, Joe, I like stories, and we got quite a ways to walk. A lot of time for stories. What about this Porter contract? The Porter contract. The Porter contract. A story that everybody knows about the Porter contract. It goes like this. Out there in Waterbury, two brothers figured out that there was this huge market for clocks all across this nation. In the early days before the war, clocks imported from Europe or made by the master craftsmen in big cities like Boston or Philly were the only clocks on the market. They were a luxury item. Only wealthy merchants could afford to put them on their mantle. But then the war came, and afterwards the boycotts and embargoes, and soon clocks were nowhere to be found. There was lots of demand and no supply. Inevitably, some folks right here in Connecticut sensed an opportunity and started to design clocks from raw materials they came handy, which around here was wood. So here they go clock making wooden clocks from local lumber instead of using the expensive metal that had to be imported from Europe. And here's the kicker. Not only are the clocks better timekeepers than all the old luxury ones, but they're cheaper too. Much cheaper. So now clock fever is catching all over Connecticut. Farmers and choir boys are whittling away at clocks in their free time and then selling them upstate for a nice profit. But the problem is that no one can make clocks for everybody that wanted to buy one. The Porter brothers knew this. They sensed the pent-up demand and the fortune just waiting to be made. So they went looking for a faster way to make clocks. And they found young Eli Terry here in Plymouth. At the time, Eli was the only clockmaker using carpentry and lumber cutting machines to manufacture clock parts by the bucket load. All the other clockmakers were making one clock part at a time by hand, from start to finish, with simple tools like a jackknife and saw. But not Eli. No, he was using the same design template, but making dozens of clock parts at the same time, using his machines. Bzzz, one cut of a water-powered saw, wheels and pinions and arbors, then putting all the bunch of them together at once in the end real quick and easy. It's not manufacturing, it's mass production, they call it. So the Porter brothers see this new kind of strategy that Eli is using to make clocks faster than everyone else. They make him an offer. They say, Eli, we want you to make us 4,000 clocks, and we'll give you 3 years to do it. If you agree, we'll finance the construction of a big new factory for you, exactly how you want it designed, with lots of new machines, bundles of raw materials, and enough credit to employ a team of workers to assemble all the clock pieces. And no need to waste your days riding out to far places to sell them all to farmers who are going to pay you a year later. We will be your one and only customer, cash up front. Eli is intrigued, and he agreed. You see, John, at this time, you could only make about 100 clocks a year, doing the old method, using hand tools and making them a few at a time. But the Porters challenged Eli to make 4,000 clocks in only 3 years. You should have seen the critics hollering at Eli and his new contract. Some critics said it could never be done. Could never even make more than 200 clocks in a year. Others said that if he did get it done, he'd never find 4,000 people who wanted to buy a clock.
Well, didn't Eli prove him wrong? But it didn't look that way in the beginning. The first year, Eli didn't make any clocks at all. He just recruited 2 partners, Seth Thomas and Silas Hoadley, and then put a factory together with new machines and a precise layout designed for his mass production strategy. The critics were getting louder and the porters were getting nervous. Then in the second year, he set his machine production method into motion and made 1,000 clocks. Now the critics were shocked. It was more clocks than every other clockmaker in town had made that year combined.
And in the third year, grand old Eli fully leveraged his factory. He made the final 3,000 clocks and finished the contract as a very successful and very wealthy man. This part in his story, Ives pauses dramatically. Burge tips his head. And so? Ives leans in real close and delivers the line.
The secret is, John, that's not what really happened.
Join the next adventure of Bristol, the Quest, by subscribing to one of our social media channels at www.bristol.com, BRXSTOL.com, and ready yourself for the next story, the next clue, and ultimately, the final revelation.